bring in the Pakistanis of this world into the table. And Russia, through the ruble system, has brought in CIS, brings in the remaining ones, and similarly, the Chinese, because the Chinese got no choice. The Chinese have to accept that there's no way out. The way out is that the renminbi has to appreciate. The Chinese must accept that the wages for Chinese has to rise rapidly. The Chinese must accept that they must move away some of its manufacturing base to its neighbors, where the cost structure is still very, very low, or even African countries for that matter, where it remains a virgin. So the Chinese have got a huge responsibility in this case. If they are prepared to play that role, them being the largest reserves, being at the moment being the biggest economy, that if you're going to be a superpower, in quotes, you need to take responsibility, you need to take leadership. And that means that you have to take pain. And don't take pain because you're stupid. You're taking pain because there's a change in the global arena, and that change requires you that you cannot only succeed alone. You need to succeed with the rest of the developing world. Therefore, the last wave is to say, now we've got these strong regions amongst ourselves. Is then now to start engaging that, we've got the real being very strong in Latin America, we've got the rand being very, very strong in Africa, we've got the ruble in the CIS and the rest of the countries nearer Russia, and we've got the renminbi being accepted across Southeast Asia, bringing in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, the Malaysian, etc. We've got a wonderful system. So let's talk now the third currency of reserves. So the third currency of reserve, again, is very dependent on whether the Chinese want to play ball or not. If the Chinese want to play ball, they want to do what they're supposed to do, appreciate the currency, relocate your manufacturing base elsewhere, increase wages of the Chinese workers. Then it means that perhaps we can start talking about the renminbi as pegging our currency, the renminbi, in the process towards a new BRIC currency. And all these things, it's all theoretical. But when Europeans moved towards a euro, they didn't do it because of any other reasons. It's because if you're an advance of people, if you want to make sure that we've got broad-based development, we bring in people, the poorest of the poor, to participate in the global economy. There is no choice. Politicians must bite the bullet. It's not about them. It's about the people. So if you can maneuver and be able to mobilize, I think this idea is very, very possible. But it will require a lot of soul-searching by leadership in China, in Brazil, in South Africa, and the rest of the world. And just as a closing point, one of the areas, I think, the political conundrum that I think countries have faced, and now I'll refer back to South Africa again, is that when countries look forward, there is no time for buddy, nudge, wink, wink. You have to lead, you have to take the bill. You've got to be unpopular for a particular period, because you're not doing that for any selfish reasons, but for development of humanity. When South Africa, or all of you will have got similar stories, for South Africa to become industrialized, the black workers had to suffer because they refused to proletarize. So if you refuse proletarization, you get punishment. That's why my colleagues from India know very well that the reason why we've got the Chinese community of Africa, we've got the Indian community, is because the African majority refused to be proletarized. They learned the hard way. Because the English were much smarter than them, they decided to impose taxes on their stock. They decided to make it very difficult for them to survive, and they were forced to sell their labor. So we've seen this in history. What is different now? Why can't we have some pain in our countries? Not because we want to exploit other countries, but we want to move society to a better level. So I expect all of us to really push with the idea, because I think it's possible. Thank you very much.
With Mr. Mondi suggestions, I think we'll have a very interesting discussion in the end. But now we turn to Mauricio Mesquita for his presentation on trade.
Good morning. Well, let me begin by thanking the organizers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in the country. Just kidding. It sucks to speak in English in Brazil, but I understand the needs of the international seminar. So, as you can see from the title, my idea here is to be provocative. I know I'm going to be accused of trying to undermine the unity of the BRICS, and I'm sure some of my countrymen are going to accuse me of neoliberal and other epithets. But I firmly believe that we have to wash the dirty laundry, lavar roupa suja, if we are if we want to walk together in the long term. And the other thing is, I'm going to approach this issue from the trade point of view. Unlike Mauricio, I'm not a macroeconomist, and I'm a trade economist, whatever that means. But I'm going to focus on the impact of the exchange rate issue on trade, and I'm going to try to think of the consequences, particularly for emerging countries. So let me start with the motivations. How did I try to motivate my presentation? I mean, I think there's no doubt that exchange rate misalignments, or if you want to call manipulation, whatever, it's no doubt one of the hottest policy questions in international trade and finance in recent years. Has been getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of debate about that. But I sincerely hope that the repercussions of this debate doesn't stay there just on exchange rate. I think it's just one issue which is part of a broader problem that need to be addressed, and they all threaten the world trade. And if you really want to have trade as a tool of growth for all emerging countries, we need to really seriously look at this exchange rate debate, but go beyond that and try to look at other policy issues, particularly the way in emerging countries, not only emerging countries, but since we are talking about them, are using industrial policy to improve their competitiveness. So as I said, I think it's just one of the issues that we have to discuss. And I also believe that once you take these issues into account, look what is behind the exchange rate debate and the consequences of that, and the consequences of other actions, industrial policy actions, we're going to come to the conclusion that emerging countries have to rethink their long-standing policy stance of asking for more policy space. Asking for less regulation in international trade, asking for more space to do those kinds of industrial policies, exchange rate regimes, etc., etc. So that's what motivates my presentation. So it's organized like that. I'm going to start just talking briefly what I think we understand by misalignment, what is behind this misalignment, the issue that it's not just exchange regime that it's the problem, and the issue of how to regulate all those problems, and and then I will conclude with some, what I think should be effective policy recommendations. So, what misalignment? What we usually talk when we say that, you know, there's this big misalignment in the world economy that we need to address. And there's no doubt that economists can hardly agree on what exactly, I mean, if you want to argue there's a misalignment, you need to have some idea what will be the ideal exchange rate, or what will be the equilibrium exchange rate. And the truth is that, you know, economists can't agree exactly what is the equilibrium exchange rate. So there's a number of methods out there to try to, you know, pinpoint what exactly is the equilibrium exchange rate. There's the purchase power parity. I'm sure most of even the non-economists know about that. You just compare price levels across countries. The idea that, you know, prices have to be the same in the same currency, and the exchange rate, you know, just adjust and make sure that this happens based on the law on price. It has problems because it doesn't take into account that there are services which are not tradable. So it's not, you know, written in stone that this is the equilibrium exchange rate. There's this other method of, we call here, Williamson called it behavior equilibrium exchange rates, which you just look at, you know, you look at the economic history of a country, you just pick one period that you think that is more or less the exchange is in equilibrium, and then you use this period as a benchmark to what's happening these days. And of course, as you can imagine, it's very hard to find a period where everybody agrees that this is the period where, you know, the exchange rate is in equilibrium. There's a number of factors beyond the exchange rate. Marcia just talked about some of them, but there's this productivity, there's savings, the investment. So it's, again, it's not a foolproof. And finally, there's this so-called fundamental equilibrium exchange rates, which is the idea that the equilibrium exchange rate is the one that makes sure that there's no big imbalance in your current account. If you have, for instance, a 3% surplus in the current account, you need, you know, the exchange rate equilibrium will be the one that brings this surplus to a balance. And again, I mean, there's no agreement on what exactly is the, you know, it should be the current account balance of many countries. There's, again, a number of issues behind that. There's savings, there's investment. So, again, it's complicated. But despite all those difficulties, I'm sure that if not a consensus, I mean, I wouldn't say it's 100%, but it's a broad range of opinions there that suggest that Asia, you know, most countries in Asia, and in particular China, my colleague Professor Mondi talked about it, have an exchange rate that is substantially undervalued. So there's also talk about the dollar. You know, even our finance minister raised this issue. I sincerely don't agree that this is part of the same discussion. I mean, I think we were mixing apples with oranges. I think that the issue of the dollar has to do with, you know, clearly domestic issues. The U.S. is in a recession. It has a, you know, a deficit in its current account. One would, you know, expect that the dollar would devalue. So it's not an issue about exchange regimes. I mean, they're not targeting the exchange rate. They're trying to, you know, get out of a recession. So I think that the center of the discussion, it's Asia and how